It started with $1,500. Not a small sum by any stretch, but for my best friend Jess, it was the difference between making rent and being homeless. She called me one evening, voice shaking, practically hyperventilating. "I hate asking you this," she'd said, over and over, like she thought repeating it would soften the awkwardness. I told her not to worry, that I had some savings. What are friends for, right? I'd wired her the money that night, no strings attached, though we agreed she'd pay me back as soon as possible. The first month, I didn't think much about it. I knew she was struggling, but then I saw her Instagram posts. A casual brunch here, a new pair of sneakers there. Nothing outrageous, but enough to sting. I told myself maybe they were old photos, but the tags didn't lie. Her self-care Sunday mimosas were time-stamped from the day before. I waited another month. Then I gently brought it up over coffee. "Hey, how's everything going? You know, with work and stuff?" I tried to sound casual, but I'm sure my awkward smile gave me away. Jess's face twisted with annoyance, like I'd suggested something ridiculous. "Oh my God, are you asking about the money? I haven't forgotten. Okay? It's just been hard, but you already knew that." I backed off immediately, apologizing, feeling like a heel. She was my friend, not some debtor. Still, I couldn't shake the unease. That week, she posted about a concert she'd attended, complete with videos of her screaming along to the encore from the front row. I stared at my screen, doing mental math, trying to reconcile her struggles with her choices. By the third month, I couldn't hold my tongue anymore. We were out for dinner, her suggestion, which I assumed meant she was planning to treat. But when the check came, she casually pushed it toward me with a breezy, "I'll get the next one." I froze, my stomach churning. "Jess," I said, trying to keep my tone light, "you still haven't paid me back. Maybe skip the next one and just work on that instead?" Her expression dropped, like I'd slapped her. "Seriously? We're doing this here? In front of everyone?" I looked around. The only people nearby were the disinterested couple at the next table, scrolling through their phones. "It's just, well, you keep going out and buying things, and I'm over here feeling like the bad guy for even asking." She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "Wow, I didn't realize I had to live in a cave until I paid you back." That stung. "It's not about that. It's about priorities." "Yeah, and my priorities are staying sane. Excuse me for not crawling under a rock because I owe you money." The night ended on a sour note. I paid the bill, but my appetite was long gone. After that, things got worse. Jess stopped responding to my texts. Calls went straight to voicemail. When I did manage to reach her, she'd give me curt answers before finding an excuse to hang up. I started seeing more of her life through social media than in person. New earrings. A weekend trip to the beach. Treating myself, one caption read, under a photo of her holding an iced coffee topped with whipped cream. I stared at it so long the screen blurred, my blood boiling. I knew she wasn't rolling in cash, but if she could afford indulgences like that, why couldn't she give me something? Anything. Toward the debt? One day, I sent her a pointed text. "Hey, could we set up a repayment plan or something? Even $50 a month would help." She left me on read. Hours later, she posted a story about ordering takeout because she was too tired to cook. I nearly threw my phone across the room. Eventually, I ran into her at a mutual friend's party. She tried to avoid me at first, but I cornered her in the kitchen. "We need to talk." Her shoulders tensed. "Oh my God, not this again." "Yes, this again. I'm tired of you ignoring me. I loaned you money because you said you needed it to survive, and now you're acting like I'm harassing you just for wanting it back." She slammed her drink on the counter, the liquid sloshing over the rim. "You are harassing me. You've brought it up at dinner, over text, at the worst possible times. Do you think I don't feel bad enough already? Do you?" I snapped. "Because from where I'm standing, it seems like you don't feel bad at all. You're out here living your best life while I'm stuck wondering if I'll ever see that money again." Her eyes narrowed. "You think I'm living my best life? You have no idea what I'm dealing with." "Yeah, I treat myself sometimes, because if I didn't, I'd lose my mind. Sorry if that offends you." "Well, excuse me for wanting to be repaid for helping you out in a crisis. You didn't help me out. You threw it in my face every chance you got. I wish I'd never taken your money in the first place." That silenced me. For a moment, all I could do was stare at her, feeling like the ground had shifted beneath me. Then I turned and left the party without saying goodbye. Since then, we haven't spoken. I've replayed the argument in my head 100 times, wondering if I pushed too hard, or not hard enough. Part of me feels guilty for making her feel cornered. Another part of me thinks I had every right to. At the end of the day, I'm still out $1,500, and she's out of my life. I used to think being a good friend meant saying yes, even when every fiber of my being screamed no. That was my dynamic with Rachel, my childhood best friend. Rachel had a knack for turning her needs into emergencies, and I had a knack for being her 24/7 on-call problem solver. Whether it was helping her move for the 5th time in 2 years, staying up until 3 a.m. listening to her vent about the same breakup she caused, or loaning her money for bills she conveniently forgot to pay, I always came through. At first, I told myself it was just what friends did, but over time, the cost of our friendship began to weigh heavily on me. The breaking point came last month when Rachel called me in tears at 10 p.m. She'd been rear-ended in a parking lot and needed me to come get her. Her boyfriend was working late, she said, and she didn't want to bother her parents. I was already in bed, exhausted after a 12-hour shift at the hospital, but guilt twisted in my chest. I threw on some clothes and drove 40 minutes to meet her. When I got there, I found her sitting in her car, scrolling Instagram, the tears completely gone. "Oh, you're a lifesaver," she gushed as she climbed into my passenger seat. I was so freaked out, but the damage isn't even bad. Like, just a scratch, you know? I stared at her. "Rachel, you could have driven home." "Well, yeah," she said with a shrug, "but you know how I get about driving at night. Plus, I thought we could grab some Taco Bell on the way back. I'm starving." I took a deep breath. This was my life with Rachel in a nutshell. Her whims were my responsibilities. She'd grown so accustomed to my constant yes that she didn't even see the sacrifice behind it anymore. I was tired, not just physically, but emotionally. Still, I smiled tightly and drove her home, swinging through the Taco Bell drive-thru as requested. By the time I got back to my place, it was nearly 1 a.m., and I had to be up at 6 for another long shift. My kindness had cost me yet again. The final straw came a week later. Rachel had planned a housewarming party at her new apartment and enlisted me to help her get everything ready. She wanted me to come over 3 hours early to decorate, prep food, and set up games. I said yes, as usual, even though I had been looking forward to spending my Saturday decompressing. When I arrived, her apartment was a disaster. Dishes piled in the sink, laundry covering the couch, empty moving boxes stacked in every corner. "Sorry about the mess," she said breezily. "I figured we could clean up before the party." Something inside me snapped. I stood there, looking at the chaos, and realized I didn't want to do this anymore. I didn't want to spend my precious free time cleaning her apartment or solving her problems or being her emotional crutch. It wasn't just about this moment. It was about years of putting her needs ahead of my own. I felt like a doormat, and I hated it. "Rachel, I can't do this," I said. She looked up from the pile of decorations she was sorting, her brow furrowed. "I mean, I'm not staying to clean your apartment or host your party. I've been helping you so much lately, and it's starting to take a toll on me. I think you need to handle this on your own." Her expression shifted from confusion to hurt, then to anger. "Wow," she said, crossing her arms. "I didn't realize I was such a burden." "That's not what I'm saying," I replied, trying to stay calm. "I'm just saying I can't keep dropping everything to help you all the time. I need to set some boundaries for my own well-being." She scoffed. "Boundaries? Seriously? I've always been there for you too, you know? Remember when I drove you to the airport last Christmas?" "That's not the same," I said, but she cut me off. "It is the same. You're acting like you're this saint who's been single-handedly supporting me, but friendship is supposed to be give and take. And now, when I need you, you're just abandoning me. Do you know how selfish that sounds?" Her words hit me like a slap. Selfish. After everything I had done for her, she thought I was selfish. I could feel my throat tighten, the familiar pang of guilt creeping in. but I forced myself to stand my ground. I'm not abandoning you, Rachel. I'm just saying no for once. That doesn't make me a bad friend. She didn't see it that way. The rest of the conversation was a blur of accusations and tears, and by the time I left, I felt like I had been run over. But as I drove home, something shifted in me. For the first time in years, I didn't feel obligated to fix things with Rachel. I felt free. Since then, we've barely spoken. She texted me once, saying she needed time to process our fight, but I haven't heard from her since. Part of me misses her, but another part of me feels relieved. Setting boundaries was one of the hardest things I've ever done, but it was also one of the most necessary. I know I'm not perfect, and maybe I could have handled the situation better, but I also know I deserve friendships that don't leave me feeling drained and unappreciated. When my phone buzzed with Sarah's name, I smiled instinctively. My sister and I didn't talk every day, but when we did, it was like picking up a book you'd left mid-chapter. Everything familiar, comfortable, easy. That's why her opening line, "I really need you," hit me like a gut punch. There was no preamble, no hint of humor, just raw urgency. "Of course. What's going on?" I asked, already mentally rearranging my week. Sarah wasn't one to ask for favors lightly. She'd rather cut off her own arm than impose, which made me nervous about what might be coming. "It's Josh," she said, her voice catching on the name. "My nephew. The trial starts next Monday. You know how the prosecutor's been framing him as this reckless kid from a broken family. The lawyer thinks if you testified, talked about what a good kid he's always been, how close we are as a family, it could make a real difference." I pressed the phone tighter to my ear. Josh's legal troubles weren't new. He'd been arrested 6 months ago for a fight that got out of hand at a party. Still, my understanding had been that his lawyer was confident it would get pled down. Now, the stakes had clearly changed. "Sarah, I don't think I can do that," I said, my stomach nodding. "What? Why?" Her shock was audible, almost tangible. "It's not that I don't want to help," I began carefully, each word like walking across a minefield. "But I've got this big project launching at work. I've been pulling 14-hour days for weeks. If I take time off now, I risk the entire team's success. And there's Ethan's soccer finals this weekend. I promised I'd be there. It's his last season before high school. I just can't. Can't or won't," she interrupted, her voice colder now. "Because this sounds like a choice you're making." I sucked in a breath, steadying myself. "I'm not saying it's not important, Sarah, but flying out to testify is a major time commitment. I'd have to leave tomorrow just to prep with the lawyer. I'd be sacrificing things here that matter to me, to my family." "And we're not family? Josh isn't family?" "Of course you are." My voice rose despite my attempt to stay calm. "But it's not that simple. I have responsibilities too." Sarah's silence stretched between us like a chasm. When she finally spoke, her tone was sharp and bitter. "I see. Responsibilities. Right. Well, I hope your responsibilities are worth more than Josh's future. I'll tell him not to bother counting on you. God knows I should have known better." "Sarah, wait," I pleaded. But she had already hung up. I stared at the phone in my hand, the weight of guilt settling over me like a heavy coat. I knew how this looked to her. Selfish, uncaring. I knew she was scared, desperate, and feeling cornered. But she wasn't seeing the other side. This wasn't just about me being busy. It was about preserving the fragile balance I'd worked so hard to build. For the past 2 years, ever since my promotion, I'd been on a tightrope. Juggling the demands of work and family had left me perpetually exhausted and often guilt-ridden. Ethan had already asked me once if my job was more important than him. I'd promised myself then that I wouldn't miss the big moments, wouldn't let my son feel like a second priority. And now, Sarah was asking me to break that promise. For a good reason, yes. But still, I thought about calling her back, offering some kind of compromise. Maybe I could write a letter instead of appearing in person. Maybe I could Zoom into the courtroom. But I knew Sarah. She'd see it as a half measure, as me choosing convenience over her and Josh. And part of me couldn't blame her. When Ethan came home that evening, bursting through the door with his usual tornado of energy, I found myself watching him with new eyes. He had no idea about the storm brewing just outside his bubble of soccer practices and math homework. And that's exactly how I wanted it to stay. I couldn't let my priorities shift. Not again. Not now. 2 days later, Sarah sent a curt text. "Lawyer says your letter idea is useless. Thanks for nothing." I typed out at least 10 different responses, but none of them felt right. She wouldn't hear me. Not now. Maybe not ever. The trial started Monday, as planned. I followed updates online, my heart sinking when I read the prosecution's opening statement. They painted Josh as a violent troublemaker, a kid with no guidance, no stability. It wasn't true, and maybe my testimony could have countered it, but I'd made my choice, and I had to live with it. Sarah didn't call after the verdict came down. Guilty on a reduced charge, 6 months in juvenile detention. I'd been bracing myself for her anger, her disappointment, but the silence was worse. Ethan scored the winning goal at the soccer finals. He ran to me afterward, his face lit with pure joy, and I hugged him tight, my throat tight with conflicting emotions. I hadn't been there for Sarah, but I'd been there for him. And in that moment, I felt both pride and shame in equal measure. A month has passed, and Sarah hasn't spoken to me since. Part of me thinks I should reach out, but another part of me is scared. Scared that no matter what I say, it won't be enough. That I've lost her trust for good. So here I am, putting this out into the void, asking strangers to weigh in. Did I do the wrong thing? Should I have put my own life on hold for Sarah and Josh, knowing the cost it would have on my own family? Last Saturday, I was cleaning out the guest bedroom closet. It's one of those everything and nothing spaces where we dump stuff that doesn't belong anywhere else. As I was sorting through an old box of wrapping paper and random knickknacks, I found a small journal. It was black, leather-bound, and unmistakably belonged to my younger sister, Lily. My first instinct was to close it and set it aside. I'm not someone who snoops, but the journal was already flipped open. My eyes couldn't help but catch her handwriting, looping and uneven, with a page header that made my stomach drop. Debt plan. I froze. Debt? Lily? That didn't make sense. She just graduated last year. Sure, but Mom and Dad helped her with tuition, and I'd always assumed she had a clean slate. My curiosity got the better of me. I skimmed a few lines, and my heart sank further. It wasn't just a little credit card trouble. She was in deep. There were detailed lists of overdue payments, payday loan amounts, and even some kind of high-interest personal loan with a balance that made my chest tighten. Scribbled notes at the bottom of the page showed she was juggling payments to keep collectors at bay. It was a house of cards on the verge of collapse. I felt a mix of things: shock, sadness, anger, guilt. How could I not have known? Lily and I had always been close. Growing up, we were each other's confidants, sharing everything from crushes to career dreams. And yet, this massive, life-altering struggle, she hadn't told me. I couldn't just leave it. I didn't read further, but I took the journal with me, resolving to talk to her. If she needed help, I wanted to offer it. No strings attached. She deserved a lifeline, and if I could be that for her, then I would. That night, after dinner, I found Lily in the living room scrolling through her phone. She was wearing one of my old sweatshirts, her legs tucked beneath her on the couch. She looked relaxed, happy even. It made me hesitate. Should I bring it up? Or would it ruin the moment? But then I thought of the overdue notices and the stress she must be under. I reminded myself that this was about her, not me. "Hey, Lil," I started, easing onto the arm of the couch. "Can we talk for a minute? It's important." Her face immediately shifted, eyes narrowing slightly. "Okay, what's up?" I held up the journal. Her expression went from confused to horrified in a blink. "I wasn't snooping," I rushed to say. "I swear, it was open in the closet, and I saw the page about your finances." "Lily, why didn't you tell me? You don't have to go through this alone." Her cheeks flushed bright red. She snatched the journal from my hand. "You went through my stuff?" Her voice was sharp, defensive, but there was an undercurrent of panic. "Seriously, what the hell? My name?" "I didn't go through anything," I insisted, keeping my tone calm. "I saw it by accident, and I'm worried about you. This is a lot, Lily, and if you're in trouble, I want to help. We can figure this out together." She laughed, but it wasn't her usual laugh. It was bitter and cold. "Oh, you want to help? Like you're some savior swooping in to fix poor, stupid Lily's mess? Thanks, but no thanks. I don't need your charity." Her words hit me like a slap. "It's not charity," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "You're my sister. I love you. I just don't want you to feel like you have to do this alone." "Well, maybe I do," she shot back, standing now, clutching the journal to her chest like a shield. "Maybe I don't need you or anyone else digging into my life and making me feel worse than I already do." "Did you think about that?" I was stunned. I hadn't expected gratitude necessarily, but this hostility, it caught me completely off guard. "Lily, I'm not trying to judge you. I just want to help. If you want me to back off, fine, but at least promise me you'll talk to someone. A financial advisor, maybe? Or, oh my God, stop." She cut me off, her voice rising. "You don't get it, do you? You think you're helping, but you're just making it worse. I don't need your pity. My name? And I sure as hell don't need you prying into things you don't understand." I opened my mouth to respond, but the lump in my throat made it impossible. She stormed out of the room, slamming her door behind her. I just stood there, feeling a heavy mix of hurt and helplessness. I'd only wanted to make things better, but somehow, I'd made them worse. The rest of the evening was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels oppressive. I replayed the conversation over and over in my mind, dissecting every word. Should I have approached her differently? Should I have waited for her to come to me? Was I really overstepping, like she said? By the next morning, she was acting like nothing had happened, polite but distant. I didn't bring it up again, afraid of pushing her further away, but I couldn't shake the lingering sadness. She was my sister, and I loved her, but I felt like I'd failed her somehow. My intentions had been good, but maybe good intentions aren't enough. Now I can't stop wondering if I crossed a line, if trying to help only made me the bad guy. I'd like to think I did what anyone else would do in my shoes, but maybe I'm wrong. So here I am, putting it out there. AITA? The church bells echoed faintly through the fog as I stood on the cobblestone street, staring at the intricate carvings on a centuries-old doorway. The town smelled of damp stone and yeast, a mix of age and warmth that made me feel both grounded and unmoored. Somewhere close by, the monks were brewing, their prayers mingling with the hum of boiling water and the quiet clink of bottles. For years, I joked about this, about coming here to drink beer that was more prayer than beverage, but I never thought I'd actually make it. And not like this. My hands were stuffed deep into the pockets of a jacket too thin for the chilly Belgian spring. I felt the envelope there, the one with my son's name scrawled across it in his uneven handwriting. I hadn't opened it yet. It had arrived a week after his death, forwarded from an old address, delayed by a careless mix-up at the post office. Now it was crumpled and damp from my grip, but I couldn't bring myself to read it. Not yet. The Monk's Brewery wasn't a place for tourists. They didn't give tours or slap their logo on souvenir pint glasses. You placed an order weeks in advance, showed up at a tiny office to collect your single case, and left quietly, as if you'd stolen something sacred. I hadn't pre-ordered, of course. That required foresight, the kind that disappeared the moment a cop at my front door said, "I'm sorry, Mr. Donovan, there's been an accident." But I'd come anyway, hoping, praying in my own clumsy way. Maybe they'd have a cancellation, a few spare bottles. Maybe they'd see the grief etched into my face and take pity on me. When I explained the situation to the stoic monk at the counter, his expression barely shifted. He told me to wait. I didn't know if that meant they'd find a way to help me, or if he just wanted me out of the way, but I nodded and stepped outside, back into the misty drizzle. I wasn't sure what I was waiting for anymore. Not just here, but in life. My son was gone, killed by a drunk driver on a March evening when the world was just beginning to thaw. His absence was a raw, gaping wound, one I couldn't bandage with logic or drown in whiskey. I tried both. Neither worked. So I'd taken his university fund and booked a flight, told no one except my wife, who had nodded and said, he'd want you to go. He would have. That thought both comforted and gutted me. The fund had been our joke for years. If you don't go to college, I'm blowing this money on a trip to Europe to drink beer brewed by monks, I teased him. He'd always laughed, never taking the bait, his grin as sharp as his mind. "Good luck getting a case," he'd retort. "They don't just give it away to random tourists, Dad." But here I was, the random tourist, waiting. The monk returned, carrying a plain wooden crate. He set it down gently, as if handling a fragile relic, then met my eyes. "We had an extra," he said simply. His English was crisp, his tone kind but firm, like a doctor delivering a diagnosis. I couldn't find words, so I nodded and fumbled for my wallet. He waved me off. "No charge. Just enjoy it properly." His gaze lingered, heavy with understanding, before he turned and disappeared into the shadows. I carried the crate to a small square nearby, where I found a bench under a tree just beginning to bloom. I pried open the lid, pulled out a bottle, and stared at it. The label was simple, almost austere. No flashy branding, just the name of the abbey and a few cryptic details. I twisted the cap and poured a careful stream into the glass I'd bought at a second-hand shop that morning. It smelled rich, complex, like the sum of 100 tiny miracles. I lifted the glass, hesitating. "To you, kid," I whispered. The first sip was shocking, a burst of flavor so vivid it was almost overwhelming. It was the kind of beer you didn't just drink. You experienced it, let it unfold slowly, each sip revealing something new. I could almost hear his voice in my head, teasing me. "Don't get too emotional, old man. It's just beer." Except it wasn't. It was the last conversation we'd never have, the laughter we'd never share, the milestones he'd never reach. It was everything and nothing, a small, liquid monument to the boy who'd turned my world upside down the moment he was born and left it shattered the moment he died. I drank slowly, watching the town come alive as the fog began to lift. Children played in the square, their laughter bright and unbroken. An old man fed pigeons, scattering crumbs like confetti. Life went on, as it always does, indifferent to the wreckage it leaves behind. But for the first time in months, I didn't feel like an intruder in that life. I wasn't healed. I didn't think I ever would be, but I was here, alive, drinking beer in a foreign square under a blooming tree. And for now, that was enough. When the glass was empty, I reached into my pocket and pulled out the envelope. My hands trembled as I tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, his handwriting sprawling across it in blue ink. It wasn't a letter, not really. Just a list of things he wanted to do someday. Visit Japan, learn to surf, write a book, drink Westfiltrin 12 with Dad. I stared at the last line until the words blurred, then laughed softly through my tears. "You win," I said to no one in particular. I raised the empty glass again, as if he could see me, as if he was there. And in a way, he was. I stepped into their house for the first time with my bag slung over my shoulder, the quiet buzz of anticipation tingling in my chest. Babysitting wasn't new to me, but every family carried its own little quirks. This one, I had been told, was easy. 2 boys, 7 and 10. Pizza for dinner. A quick bedtime. In and out, and I'd have some extra cash to pocket by the end of the night. Simple, right? The mom, all smiles and soft curls, met me at the door, juggling a purse and a set of keys. She was mid-sentence before I even got a word in. The kids know the rules. I left cash for the pizza. Should be more than enough. Just pay the delivery guy, and you can hang out after bedtime. I nodded along, watching the swirl of her hurried exit, but one detail stood out. She didn't mention food. That wasn't abnormal. Most parents assumed you'd figure it out, and honestly, a little pizza shared between me and the kids? No big deal. Babysitters always ate on the job. It was practically a given. The boys were great, rowdy in that typical, "We have a stranger here, so let's show off" way, but nothing unmanageable. We played a few rounds of hide-and-seek until the sound of the doorbell announced dinner. Large cheese pizza, breadsticks, and a slight whiff of garlic that made my stomach growl. The boys cheered, racing to the table, and I followed with plates in hand. "Can we have 3 pieces each?" the younger one asked, his wide eyes darting from the box to my face. "Let's start with 2, I said. "You can always grab more after." I served the slices, made sure they had their drinks, and then casually grabbed a plate for myself. 2 pieces and a breadstick. Nothing crazy, just enough to tide me over. By the time the boys were done, their faces smudged with sauce and giggles echoing through the kitchen, I'd finished my share too. We cleaned up, played a little more, and before I knew it, bedtime rolled around. It was smooth sailing, teeth brushed, pajamas on, lights out. I plopped onto the couch, scrolling through my phone, feeling accomplished. The parents came home just after 10. The dad looked a little tired, the mom still radiating that post-night out glow. "How was everything?" she asked, setting her purse down. "Great," I said. The boys went to bed without a fuss. "Oh, and that pizza place? Really good. I've never tried them before." Her smile faltered. "You ate the pizza?" I blinked, caught off guard. "Yeah, just a couple of pieces." The kids were full, so I figured it was fine. The dad joined her side, his expression sharpening. "We didn't expect you to eat their dinner." I felt a strange heat rise in my cheeks. I only had 2 pieces. There was plenty left. "It's not about how much you ate," he said, his tone teetering on the edge of frustration. "We didn't hire you to eat our food." The room suddenly felt smaller, the air heavier. My mind raced through every babysitting gig I'd ever had. Families who practically shoved snacks in my hands, who left handwritten notes saying, "Help yourself to anything." Was this not normal? Had I crossed some invisible line? "I'm sorry," I said finally, my voice quieter than I intended. "I thought it was okay." The mom sighed, clearly trying to smooth things over. "Let's just move on. We'll call you if we need you again." The walk home felt longer than usual, each step echoing with their words. Was I in the wrong? It was just 2 slices. They hadn't even said anything about the food beforehand. But the more I thought about it, the more their reaction gnawed at me. Maybe they had some unspoken rule, some expectation that went unsaid. Or maybe, just maybe, they were being unreasonably petty. By the time I reached my apartment, my stomach wasn't full of pizza anymore. It was full of questions. It started with an innocent suggestion, like all wars do. Sarah had just collapsed onto the couch, still in her scrubs, her feet tucked under her like a cat's tail. She let out one of those exaggerated sighs that signaled she was done with the day and handed over the TV remote. "Your turn to pick," she said, tilting her head back against the cushions, her ponytail sliding off one shoulder. I should have known better than to take it literally. I should have just scrolled aimlessly through Netflix while pretending to care, like I always do. Instead, I decided to put my foot down. "I think we should start a new series," I said. "Something we can really get into." Sarah peeked one eye open, suspicious already. "Okay," she said slowly, "but nothing too intense. I can't deal with anything depressing or, scary right now." My heart sank a little because I knew exactly where this was going. She wanted something light. Something where people wore cute outfits, lived in immaculate apartments, and solved their conflicts with quirky misunderstandings and heartfelt apologies. Meanwhile, I needed a story that made my pulse race. Twists that left me staring at the screen, stunned. Characters I could sink my teeth into, not sugar-coated versions of reality. I needed stakes, life or death stakes. "All right," I said, "but maybe we can find a middle ground? Something with, a mystery or some drama. You know, a good plot?" Sarah frowned. "Define good plot. Because if this is leading to another one of your dark detective searching for meaning shows, I'm out." "Not all detectives are searching for meaning," I argued. "Some are just trying to solve crimes." "Oh, yeah," she countered. "And how many of those crimes end with everybody happy and alive?" 0. I opened Netflix, determined to prove her wrong. "We'll just watch some trailers," I said. "See what feels right." The first one we clicked on was Broadchurch. I'd seen it before and loved it, but I figured it was mellow enough for Sarah. As soon as the trailer started, though, I could feel her growing unease. The beach, the child, the mournful violins. It was a hard no. "This is what I mean," she said. "It's so bleak. Do you seriously want to come home after work and spend an hour feeling miserable?" "But it's so good," I protested. "It's not just sad. It's gripping. It's like peeling back layers of an onion. You think you know someone, and then bam, a secret. Don't you want something that keeps you guessing?" Not if the guessing is about which character is the least traumatized, she shot back. I'd rather guess who gets the rose on The Bachelor. I rolled my eyes, but not too dramatically. This was a delicate dance. I tried to sell her on Mindhunter next. She didn't even make it past the ominous voiceover. Nope, she said, popping the pea. Serial killers? You're joking. They don't actually kill people on screen, I said. It's about the psychology, why they do it. It's fascinating. It's horrifying, she replied. I just spent 10 hours working with actual human beings. I don't need fictional ones in even worse situations. I sighed and let her pick. She scrolled until she landed on a show called Emily in Paris. I didn't even need to watch the trailer to know it wasn't for me. The title alone sounded like an allergy trigger. But I played along, watching as a bubbly American girl stumbled her way through France in a montage of pastel outfits and romantic mishaps. This looks fun, Sarah said, her voice light. Like, it doesn't take itself too seriously. Yeah, I muttered. Because it doesn't take anything seriously? What's wrong with that? She asked. It's escapism. You could use some of that, you know? I tried to explain it to her. The way light shows left me restless, unsatisfied. It's like eating cotton candy, I said. It's sweet for a second, but then it's gone, and you're still hungry. She stared at me, unimpressed. And your murder mysteries are like eating broccoli? They're steak, I corrected. Rich, complex, and worth the time. We kept scrolling. The Good Place caught my eye because it had some philosophical depth, but Sarah said it was too weird. She suggested Schitt's Creek, which had me gritting my teeth by the end of the trailer. Every attempt to compromise ended in a dead end, each of us doubling down on our preferences. Eventually, I paused on Breaking Bad. I hadn't seen it in years and thought maybe its mix of intensity and humor would win her over. But 1 minute into the trailer, Sarah shook her head. I can't, she said. Drugs, crime, cancer? Are you trying to ruin my life? I threw up my hands. At least it's funny sometimes. Dark humor is still humor. I don't need dark anything right now, she snapped. I just want something happy. I leaned back, frustrated. Why is everything I like too much for you? And why is everything I like not enough for you? She shot back. We sat there, the silence thick with tension. I wanted to say it was just TV, but it wasn't. It was about the kind of stories we wanted to live in, even temporarily. Sarah needed relief from the real world, while I needed to make sense of it, to confront it head-on. Neither of us was wrong, but neither of us was willing to bend. Finally, I said, what if we try one episode of each? You pick one, I pick one. If either of us hates it, we stop? She considered this, then nodded reluctantly. Fine, but I'm picking first. We ended up watching Emily in Paris, and to her credit, I didn't hate it as much as I expected. It was predictable and fluffy, but there was something disarming about how shamelessly it leaned into its cliches. Still, by the end of the episode, I felt like I'd eaten a bowl of frosting for dinner. Next, I queued up True Detective. Sarah made it 10 minutes before declaring it way too heavy. We argued again, but less heated this time, both of us too tired to keep fighting. In the end, we went back to scrolling, the remote passing silently between us like a white flag. Now I'm wondering if I pushed too hard, if I should have just let her have this one. She works harder than I do, and probably needs the downtime more. But is it so wrong to want a story that challenges me? Something that sticks with me longer than a laugh track? AITA? When Alex suggested we finally take a vacation together, I lit up like a kid on Christmas morning. It had been years since either of us had done anything more adventurous than splurge on delivery sushi while binge-watching some true crime docuseries. I immediately pictured us trekking through lush forests, scrambling over rocks to reach hidden waterfalls, and exploring ancient ruins with the kind of awe you only see in travel brochures. But when Alex followed up with, I was thinking something like Bali or the Maldives, my excitement fizzled. Alex's idea of a dream getaway? Lying motionless on a beach chair while slowly turning the color of a well-done rotisserie chicken. I tried not to sound dismissive as I said, that sounds relaxing. But what about something more active? Like Patagonia? Maybe? We could hike to glaciers, kayak on turquoise lakes, Alex cut me off with a laugh. Kayak on a lake? That sounds like work. I'm talking about poolside cocktails and not having to move unless it's to flip onto my stomach for an even tan. Right, but we do that already. At home. Well, minus the cocktails. I mean, think about it. We could have a once-in-a-lifetime adventure, go somewhere off the beaten path, and come back needing a vacation from our vacation? Alex teased, their voice light, but with just enough of an edge to tell me this wasn't going to be an easy sell. The debate began in earnest over dinner that night, plates of takeout Thai noodles and a shared bottle of wine between us. I laid out my case. The thrill of discovery, the beauty of untouched landscapes, the satisfaction of pushing ourselves a little bit out of our comfort zones. Alex countered with the bliss of doing absolutely nothing, of waking up whenever we wanted and spending days with no agenda besides when to reapply sunscreen. You hate being bored, I pointed out, swirling my wine glass dramatically for effect. By day 3, you'd be climbing the walls. And you hate being exhausted, Alex shot back, a smirk tugging at their lips. You'd complain about your feet hurting after the first 5 miles of hiking. Touché. But this was more than just a preference. It was a feeling I couldn't quite articulate, a yearning to see the world beyond our small bubble. I tried explaining it to Alex. How I'd grown up in a family that never traveled because money was tight and responsibilities were endless. I had this gnawing sense that if I didn't seize every chance to explore now, I'd blink and find myself 50, still talking about how much I wanted to see Machu Picchu. Alex softened at that, but their own reasoning was just as poignant. I get it, they said, twirling noodles onto their fork. But growing up, every trip we took was a let's cram as much as possible into 4 days ordeal. My parents would drag us through museums and historical sites until my legs felt like they were going to fall off. It was all go, go, go. No actual rest. I just want one vacation where I can exist, where there's no pressure to do or see or achieve anything. Just us and some sunshine. That hit me harder than I expected. We were both chasing something we'd missed out on as kids, trying to rewrite the stories our families had handed us. It wasn't just about beaches versus mountains. It was about reclaiming a sense of freedom, each in our own way. We spent the next week trying to find middle ground. I suggested Costa Rica, with its blend of rainforests and resort beaches, but Alex worried I'd spend the whole time dragging them on zipline tours. Alex pitched an all-inclusive in Mexico, promising we could book an excursion or two if I got stir-crazy, but the thought of being confined to a resort made me itch. For every compromise, there was a catch. Every time we circled back to the conversation, it felt like we were arguing less about the destination and more about who we were as people. Were we fundamentally incompatible or just stubborn? One evening, after yet another stalemate, Alex slid a travel magazine across the couch to me. Look, they said, pointing to an article about Croatia. There are beaches for me and hiking trails for you. Plus, we could rent a car and explore those cute little villages. I flipped through the glossy pages, trying to muster enthusiasm. It sounded fine, but fine wasn't what I wanted. I wanted awe, exhilaration. And maybe that was selfish of me, but wasn't a vacation supposed to be about doing something extraordinary? Meanwhile, Alex seemed resigned to the idea that we'd end up doing whatever I wanted. They even joked about buying a pair of hiking boots for the trip, but the way they said it made my chest tighten. This wasn't a compromise, it was a concession, and it left a bitter taste in my mouth. Last night, as we lay in bed scrolling through Instagram travel accounts, Alex turned to me and said, maybe we should just do 2 separate trips. It wasn't an accusation or a threat, just a quiet suggestion, but it felt like a punch to the gut. The whole point of this vacation was to spend time together, wasn't it? To escape the monotony of our everyday lives and reconnect? The idea of going alone, even to my dream destination, felt hollow. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the heater kicking on. I don't want separate trips, I said finally. I want us to figure this out. Together. Alex sighed. Me too. But it feels like no matter what we choose, one of us is going to be disappointed. I rolled onto my side to face them, their profile illuminated by the glow of their phone screen. What if we split the trip? I suggested. Do a few days of hiking and exploring, then a few days of relaxing on the beach? They considered this for a moment, their expression unreadable. That sounds exhausting. And boring, I admitted, laughing despite myself. We ended up falling asleep without resolving anything, the tension hanging in the air like a low cloud. And now, as I sit here typing this, I can't help but wonder if there's a way to make both of us happy without either of us compromising what we really want. Is it selfish to push for the kind of trip I've always dreamed of? Or am I being unfair to expect Alex to give up their idea of paradise? I never thought I'd be the kind of person who ends up in an all-out passive-aggressive war over dirty dishes and unvacuumed carpets, but here we are. My roommate, Jake, and I used to be friends, good friends, actually. We met in college, moved into this 2-bedroom apartment after graduation, and everything was fine. At first, anyway. But it turns out there's a fine line between "I've got your back, bro," and "if you leave one more empty pizza box on the counter, I'm going to scream." The problem started small. Jake wasn't the cleanest guy, but neither was I. When he left a plate or two in the sink, I didn't mind washing them while doing my own dishes. If I accidentally left a pile of laundry on the couch for a few days, he didn't say anything either. It was give and take, or so I thought. Then one day, I realized the give part was mostly me. Jake's dishes weren't just a plate or two anymore. It was pots, pans, glasses, Tupperware, stuff I didn't even know we owned. The trash would overflow, and instead of taking it out, he'd just balance one more item on top like he was playing Jenga with our garbage. And somehow, I always ended up cleaning it up because I couldn't stand living like that. At first, I tried dropping hints. "Wow, this sink is really filling up, huh?" I'd say with a laugh. Jake would just nod, maybe throw in a half-hearted, "Yeah, I'll get to it later," and then never get to it. Eventually, I stopped hinting and just started doing it myself, which was probably my first mistake. It didn't take long for Jake to figure out that if he ignored a mess long enough, I'd take care of it. I became the designated cleaner of the apartment, not because we agreed on it, but because the alternative was living in squalor. I snapped about 3 months ago. I had just spent my Saturday scrubbing the bathroom, vacuuming the living room, and wiping down the kitchen counters while Jake lounged on the couch, scrolling on his phone. By the time I finished, I was sweaty, exhausted, and furious. But instead of confronting him like an adult, I made a decision. If Jake didn't care about the mess, then neither would I. Let's see how he likes living in filth. At first, it felt kind of liberating. I let the dishes pile up, ignored the overflowing trash, and even left my own laundry on the floor just to make a point. It didn't take long for the apartment to turn into a war zone. The kitchen smelled like old takeout, the bathroom sink was lined with toothpaste globs, and the living room looked like a tornado had swept through. I figured Jake would crack before I did. He'd realize how gross it was, apologize for being a slob, and we'd come up with a fair cleaning schedule. But instead, he doubled down. Jake didn't just ignore the mess. I swear he started adding to it on purpose. One night, I came home to find the coffee table buried under empty snack bags and soda cans. I could see the grease stains from his fingerprints smeared across the remote. The next day, he left a dirty sock on the kitchen counter. A sock. I wasn't sure if it was a joke or a declaration of war. Either way, I wasn't about to back down. Things escalated from there. I stopped taking out the trash completely, and so did he. It got so bad that we started keeping garbage bags next to the bin because neither of us wanted to be the first to cave. Jake left an open jar of peanut butter on the counter for 2 days. I retaliated by forgetting to flush the toilet. One morning, I woke up to find his cereal bowl still full of soggy milk on the couch armrest. That same night, I left an unwashed blender full of dried smoothie remnants on the kitchen counter. We weren't even trying to pretend anymore. It was a game of chicken, and we were both determined to win. The tension between us grew thick enough to cut with a knife. We barely spoke, except to mutter passive-aggressive comments like, "Guess we're out of clean forks again," or "Hope you're enjoying the fruit flies in the kitchen." One time, I overheard Jake complaining to his friend on the phone about how he was living with the laziest roommate ever, and I nearly burst a blood vessel. Lazy? Me? The guy who used to vacuum every week while he watched football? I wanted to scream, but instead, I left a stack of unopened mail on his bed. Mature, I know. Our standoff reached its breaking point last week. I came home to find Jake had left raw chicken on the counter after defrosting it, and it had been sitting there for God knows how long. The smell hit me like a wall of death. Furious, I grabbed the chicken, marched into his room, and dropped it on his desk while he was gaming. He barely looked up. "Real mature, dude," he said, like I was the crazy one. I stormed back to my room, slamming the door so hard a picture fell off the wall. Later that night, I found my half-eaten pint of ice cream melted on the bathroom sink. Touché, Jake. Touché. Now we're at a stalemate. The apartment is a disaster zone. We can't stand each other, and neither of us wants to be the first to admit defeat. Part of me knows I should just sit him down and talk about it like an adult, but the other part of me doesn't want to give him the satisfaction. I keep thinking, why should I have to be the one to fix this? He's the one who started it. But then again, maybe he's thinking the exact same thing. When Jamie and I first moved in together, we didn't talk much about pets. Sure, there were passing comments, like the time we saw a golden retriever bounding through the park, and I said, "I'd love a dog like that. Imagine hiking with him." Jamie nodded, but their eyes drifted toward a calico lounging on a nearby bench. Cats are more my speed. So chill, perfect for cozy nights. At the time, it didn't feel like a disagreement, just another one of those quirks about us that didn't quite line up. Like how I prefer pineapple on pizza and Jamie refuses to even entertain the idea. But then last month, while unpacking groceries, Jamie said casually, "Maybe we should get a pet." I froze mid-reach for the cereal box. Are we ready for that? Why not? It'd make this place feel more like home. They weren't wrong. Our apartment, despite its sprawling windows and charming crown molding, still felt empty. The kind of empty that made echoes feel loud and made nights and feel lonelier than they should. A pet could change that. Something warm and alive to greet us at the door. The idea of sharing that responsibility with Jamie felt strangely thrilling, like this was the next chapter for us. "Okay," I said, grinning. "Dog." "Cat," Jamie said at the exact same time. We both laughed, but the kind that carried an undertone of, "Oh." I wasn't worried at first. Jamie's logical, reasonable. We'd talk it out, maybe flip a coin or something. But every conversation ended with us circling back to the same thing. Jamie had dreamed of having a cat since childhood. Meanwhile, I had wanted a dog for years. It wasn't just about wanting a pet, it was about what that pet represented for each of us. I started imagining my life with a dog, a sturdy, goofy Labrador, the kind who'd sprint into a lake without hesitation, dragging me in after him. Someone to run with in the mornings, making exercise feel less like a chore. He'd love road trips, stick his head out the window and wag his tail in sync with the wind. At home, he'd curl at my feet while I worked or sprawl across the couch during movie nights. A loyal companion. I could see us hiking trails, meeting strangers. Dogs make friends out of everyone. He'd bring this energy to my life that I hadn't even realized I'd been missing. Jamie, meanwhile, painted an entirely different picture. They envisioned a sleek, elegant cat perched on the windowsill, bathed in golden sunlight. "Cats are soothing," Jamie said one evening. "They're self-sufficient, but they still love you in their own way. Imagine reading on the couch with one curled up beside you, purring. No barking, no constant need for attention. Just peace." They spoke about the quiet companionship a cat would offer, the way it would fit seamlessly into our lives without being disruptive. Plus, Jamie added, "We're in an apartment. A cat makes more sense." That part stung a little. Was Jamie saying I wasn't practical? I brought up how a lot of dog breeds thrive in apartments, as long as they get enough exercise. Jamie countered by mentioning how cats are easier to take care of overall. The discussion was still calm, but it felt like we were arguing philosophies more than logistics. Jamie wanted peace and comfort. I wanted energy and adventure. We weren't fighting, not really. Every time the topic came up, we listened to each other carefully. I knew Jamie wasn't dismissing my dreams of early morning runs with a floppy-eared dog, and I wasn't brushing aside their vision of a sun-dappled cat purring contentedly on our bed. But as much as we respected each other's perspective, neither of us could shake the feeling that the other just didn't get it. For Jamie, cats were tied to memories of their grandmother's house. A cozy, safe haven where they'd curl up with a book, a cat purring softly nearby. Jamie had lost their grandmother a few years ago, and I could tell this wasn't just about wanting a pet. It was about recreating a piece of that lost comfort. For me, it was different. I grew up in a busy, chaotic family. Dogs were our constant companions. Messy, slobbery, full of love. When I moved out on my own, the silence felt like an itch I couldn't scratch. Getting a dog wasn't just about having a pet. It was about reclaiming that sense of belonging. The idea of settling for a cat felt, to me, like trying to replace a spark with a flicker. One night, after a lot of back and forth, I suggested we compromise with something neutral. What about a rabbit? I asked, only half serious. Or a parrot. Or, I don't know, a fish? Jamie gave me a look. How is a fish neutral? I laughed, but the tension didn't really break. The more we talked, the more I realized this wasn't a decision we could make lightly. Pets aren't disposable, they're family. Choosing one over the other didn't feel like a win for either of us. It felt like asking one of us to give up something deeply personal, and I hated that. Jamie deserved their cozy, sunlit cat, and I deserved my bounding, energetic dog. But how could we have both? We tried brainstorming solutions. Maybe I could get a dog and Jamie could get a cat, but the thought of dividing our attention, or worse, the two animals not getting along, felt stressful. Jamie suggested fostering first, but the idea of having to eventually let go of an animal made my heart ache. Every potential compromise felt incomplete, like a puzzle missing a corner piece. Last night, Jamie looked at me across the couch, their brow furrowed. I don't want this to be a fight. It's not, I said quickly, though it felt dangerously close. I want you to be happy, they said softly. I want the same for you, I replied. And that's the frustrating part. We both mean it. We both want to make this work. But it's starting to feel impossible. Neither of us wants to push the other into resenting our choice. We love each other too much for that. So now I'm stuck. I've been spiraling over this all day. Jamie went to bed early, and I'm sitting here typing this out, wondering if there's something I'm missing. I can't shake the guilt. Guilt that I might be selfish for wanting a dog when Jamie clearly wants a cat just as much, and guilt that I might be letting Jamie down if I cave. It started as a joke. A stupid, harmless joke. At least, that's what I told myself when I decided to prank Mike, my coworker and supposed best work buddy. Mike's the kind of guy who always claims he's unflappable, like nothing can shake his composure. He's always making sly comments about how I'm too reactive or easy to mess with. So, when he left his computer unlocked during lunch, the temptation was too much to resist. I didn't do anything crazy, at least, not by my standards. I just changed his desktop background to a picture of his high school yearbook photo, braces and all, and replaced the text of his email signature with Mike, the Hot Pocket King Reynolds. I figured it was low stakes, right? Funny but harmless. Besides, Mike dishes it out all the time. He once put my stapler in Jell-O. He had it coming. When he came back from lunch and saw the changes, his face twisted into a kind of half-smile, half-grimace. "Oh, so this is how it is now?" he asked. I laughed it off, shrugging. You leave your computer open, you pay the price. Rules are rules. I thought it was over, until I went to refill my coffee the next morning. My desk chair had been replaced with an inflatable pool float shaped like a donut. Very funny, right? Except my boss walked by as I was trying to sit down, and the stupid thing squeaked like I was sitting on a whoopee cushion. Everyone in the office burst out laughing. Even our intern was snickering behind her monitor. Mike strolled by with a smug grin, raising his coffee cup in a mock toast. I could have let it go. I should have let it go. But no, Mike had escalated things, and I wasn't about to be the office joke. That weekend, I went all out. I printed 200 copies of a ridiculous meme with Mike's face photoshopped onto a cartoon bodybuilder and taped them up all over the office, bathrooms, break room, even inside his cubicle drawers. I also made sure to set up a small Bluetooth speaker under his desk and play Jim grunting sounds at random intervals throughout the day. The office was roaring. People were crying with laughter, clutching their sides. Mike wasn't. His face was redder than a tomato, and he kept yanking the pictures down, muttering something about professionalism. At the end of the day, he shot me a look and said, "You think this is funny? Just wait." The next day, My locker at the gym was mysteriously jammed shut. I had to ask the attendant to cut the lock off, which was embarrassing enough. But when I opened it, my clothes weren't there. Instead, there was a banana costume with a note that read, "Guess you're a little late for pranks, huh? Cheers, Mike." I had to drive home in the costume, since my clothes were conveniently misplaced. Now it was war. I waited until our monthly team meeting, the one where the big bosses sat in. Mike always bragged about being prepared for his presentations, so I decided to test that. I replaced the slides on his USB drive with a series of progressively ridiculous cat memes, ending with a particularly aggressive one that read, "I'm Mike, and I'm not kidding around." When his slides popped up, the room fell silent. Then, people started giggling. Mike tried to explain, but the VP just looked at him like he'd lost his mind. Afterward, he cornered me in the break room. "You think you're so clever, huh? You're gonna regret this." That night, I couldn't log into my work email. Turns out, someone, Mike, had reported suspicious activity on my account, locking me out temporarily. I spent 2 hours on the phone with IT, only to find my inbox flooded with fake spam about signing up for goat yoga classes. I thought I'd hit my limit. I was ready to bury the hatchet until I walked into the office the next day and found my desk covered in glitter. I'm not talking a sprinkle here and there. It was like a unicorn exploded on my workspace. My keyboard was ruined. My chair sparkled in places it shouldn't, and my coffee mug looked like a disco ball. I couldn't even complain because Mike had conveniently taken the day off, leaving me to clean up the mess solo. By this point, the entire office was invested in our little war. People would egg us on, suggesting new ways to outdo each other. And, like idiots, we kept delivering. I ordered a singing telegram to come to the office and perform a song about Mike's love for kombucha. Mike retaliated by signing me up to give a motivational speech at a local networking event. A speech I didn't know about until I got an email confirmation thanking me for volunteering. I bombed, of course. Things spiraled fast after that. My car mysteriously got towed from the office lot, thanks to a bogus complaint Mike made. And I may or may not have sent a glitter bomb to his apartment that exploded all over his girlfriend's cat. By the time HR got involved, we weren't even speaking to each other unless it was to hurl thinly veiled insults. When the dust finally settled, I looked around and realized how far we'd fallen. The camaraderie we used to have was gone, replaced by a toxic atmosphere everyone could feel. My other coworkers started avoiding me, probably worried they'd get caught in the crossfire. Mike wasn't much better. He started coming in late and leaving early, barely saying 2 words to anyone. Last week, I found an apology card on my desk. I don't know if it was from Mike or someone else, but it made me think, did I take things too far? Was it his fault for escalating? Or was I just too stubborn to back down when it mattered? So now I'm asking you, Reddit, AITA? When Ethan first brought up the idea of getting a dog, I'll admit, I wasn't completely sold. It wasn't that I didn't like dogs. I loved them. I just didn't think our lives were exactly pet-friendly. Between my erratic work schedule and Ethan's habit of spontaneously disappearing to chase creative inspiration, read long drives with no clear destination, I wasn't sure we'd manage. But Ethan was insistent. He had all the arguments lined up. A dog would bring us closer, it would force us to go on walks together, and the piece de resistance, a dog is like a little family. By the time he showed me a picture of a floppy-eared golden retriever puppy on an adoption site, I was weak. "Look at that face," he said, his voice dripping with emotion. "We have to rescue him." And that was it. Before I knew it, we were in the car, picking up Baxter, a name Ethan had already decided on, as if this was a done deal from the start. I should have known the honeymoon phase wouldn't last. At first, it was kind of magical. Baxter was a wriggly bundle of joy, tail wagging so hard it seemed like it might fly off. Ethan was enamored. He bought all the dog gear, chew toys, a leash that doubled as a seatbelt, an absurdly expensive bed. He was the one who insisted on the puppy training classes, dragging me along with promises of bonding time. "It'll be fun," he said. "We'll be those dog people who know all the commands." But as soon as the novelty started wearing off, Ethan's enthusiasm took a nosedive. The first sign was the midnight bathroom runs. "I can't tonight," he mumbled one evening, face buried in his pillow. I've got that meeting tomorrow. I ended up standing in the cold, half asleep, while Baxter sniffed every blade of grass in the yard like it contained ancient wisdom. And then it wasn't just the late-night potty breaks. It was the morning ones, too. "Babe," Ethan groaned, shaking my shoulder at 6:30 a.m. "Can you let Baxter out? I need to catch up on sleep." Then it was the feeding schedule. "I thought you fed him already," he'd say, even though it had clearly been my turn. The dog hair vacuuming? Forget it. The adorable dog toys Ethan had eagerly purchased, left strewn around the apartment for me to pick up. "Hey," I said one Saturday, as I scrubbed out Baxter's food bowl while Ethan lounged on the couch. "I feel like I'm doing everything for this dog. Didn't you say this was going to be a shared responsibility?" He looked up from his phone, barely masking his irritation. "It is shared. I took him to the vet last week, remember?" "That was 2 weeks ago," I shot back, my voice sharper than I intended. "And I made the appointment. You just showed up." "You're blowing this way out of proportion," he muttered, already looking back at his screen. "It's not like I'm neglecting him." At the time, I swallowed my frustration, but the resentment was bubbling just below the surface, and it finally boiled over a few weeks later. Baxter had started acting out. He chewed up one of Ethan's shoes and tore through a corner of the couch. He barked incessantly at shadows, as if they were personal enemies. But worst of all, he'd started looking, well, sad. His tail didn't wag as much, and his once bouncy trot had slowed to a mournful shuffle. I brought it up to Ethan, but he shrugged. "He's just a dog. Dogs get bored sometimes. He's fine." "Fine," I snapped. "He's miserable, Ethan. We're not walking him enough. We're not playing with him enough. We're supposed to be giving him a good life, remember? That was the whole point." Ethan threw his hands up in exasperation. "Well, excuse me for having a job. Not all of us can rearrange our entire day around Baxter." It was a low blow, and I felt the sting of it. "Oh, so now it's my fault? You're the one who wanted him. I told you this was going to be a huge commitment, but you swore you'd handle it. And I have been." Ethan shot back. "You're acting like I don't do anything, which is complete crap. I take him to the park. I've trained him not to pee on the rug. Just because I'm not doing every little thing doesn't mean I'm a bad dog owner." "Every little thing?" I echoed, my voice rising. "Do you even hear yourself? I'm the one cleaning up after him, feeding him, making sure he gets outside. I'm doing everything because you're too busy playing creative genius to lift a finger." Ethan stood up, towering over me in that way he did when he felt backed into a corner. "Maybe if you didn't micromanage everything, I'd actually want to help more." That was the point when I grabbed Baxter's leash and stormed out, slamming the door behind me. We walked around the block in tense silence, my anger radiating through the leash. Baxter, poor thing, just plodded along, occasionally glancing up at me with those big, soulful eyes that made me feel like the worst person in the world. When we got home, Ethan was sitting on the couch, arms crossed, looking just as furious as I felt. We didn't speak. We barely even looked at each other. Baxter lay down between us, his head resting on his paws, as if he could sense the tension and wanted no part of it. The thing is, I know Ethan isn't a bad person, and I know he loves Baxter, even if he has a funny way of showing it sometimes. But every time I think about how this was supposed to bring us closer, I just feel this deep, gnawing sense of failure. Baxter deserves better. He deserves two people who can work together to give him the best life possible, not two people who spend more time blaming each other than actually fixing the problem. So now I'm sitting here, typing this out while Baxter naps at my feet, wondering if I was wrong to let this all spiral out of control. Was I too hard on Ethan? Should I have been more patient, more understanding? Or is it fair to expect someone to step up when they're the one who insisted on getting a dog in the first place? At 21, Camille had mastered the art of sliding her annoyance under a tight smile and a shrug, though the emotions brewed like an electric storm. Her housemate Lena, on the other hand, wore her exasperation on her sleeve. The two had fallen into a teetering friendship built on mutual convenience rather than genuine affection, which is why Camille found herself subjected to Lena's not-so-subtle disdain for her lifestyle choices. This morning's confrontation had been inevitable. Camille had barely unzipped the laundry service bag by her door when Lena pounced, her tone sharp enough to slice through the sunny ambience of their shared dorm. "I still can't believe you pay for that. It's such a waste of money." Lena folded her arms, eyebrows drawn together in that judgmental arch Camille had grown to loathe. Camille, to her credit, didn't react immediately. She measured her words, as she always tried to do, her internal dialogue ricocheting between defensiveness and apathy. "It's worth it to me," she said finally, pulling out a stack of perfectly folded clothes, each one smelling like lavender and privilege. Lena snorted. "Of course it is. You've got money to burn." The comment was a match to Camille's simmering frustration. The months of veiled criticism, the rolled eyes, and the occasional digs about her supposed lack of independence were more than she could take. Her parents' financial support was not a secret, nor was it a crime. Did Lena expect an apology for their generosity? For their ability to provide what they hadn't been afforded in their own youth? "Maybe I do," Camille said, her voice quiet but her tone razor-sharp. "But you know, Lena, just because you're poor doesn't mean I am." She regretted it instantly. The air between them solidified, heavy with the weight of her words. Camille had crossed a line, and she knew it. Yet, instead of retracting or softening her statement, she doubled down, not out of malice, but because backtracking felt like admitting Lena's constant criticisms were valid. Lena's face contorted with anger, though hurt flickered across her eyes. "Excuse me," she said, voice trembling, either with fury or disbelief. It was impossible to tell. Camille rolled her eyes and turned back to the laundry. "Look, you're the one who keeps bringing this up. I'm sick of it. Just let me live my life. You don't have to approve." "You're insufferable," Lena shot back, grabbing her bag and storming toward the door. "No wonder you don't have real friends." The slam of the door was both satisfying and deeply unsettling. Camille sank onto her bed, clutching a cashmere sweater like it could somehow tether her to the ground amidst the whirlwind of emotions. She felt guilt creeping in, unwelcome but undeniable. Still, a more stubborn part of her whispered, "Why does she get to shame me for having money? Why is her insecurity my burden to carry?" Days passed, and the silence between the two women stretched taut. Camille busied herself with classes and social events, but the tension hung like an invisible thread connecting them, pulling tighter with every unspoken word. The confrontation had stirred something deeper within her, questions about privilege, resentment, and what it meant to coexist with someone whose circumstances were so vastly different from her own. By Friday, the storm broke, not in words but in an act so ordinary it bordered on surreal. Camille returned to their dorm after a late lecture to find Lena sitting on the floor, sorting through a pile of damp laundry. The washer must have broken again. Lena's face was pale, her movements slow and deliberate, as though every action drained her energy. Camille hesitated at the door, guilt gnawing at her resolve. Finally, she stepped inside, setting her bag down with exaggerated care. "Need help?" Lena didn't look up. "I'm fine." The words were brittle, but Camille caught the exhaustion behind them. Against her better judgment, or perhaps because of it, she knelt beside Lena, wordlessly picking up a stray sock. They worked in silence for a while, the only sounds the rustle of fabric and the occasional drip from the faulty washer. "Look," Camille said finally, breaking the quiet. "I was out of line. What I said, it wasn't fair." Lena stopped folding, her hands hovering over a faded t-shirt. "You think?" Camille winced. "I'm sorry, okay? I don't know what it's like for you. I just get defensive because I feel like you're always judging me. But that doesn't make what I said right." For a moment, Lena said nothing. Then, with a sigh, she leaned back against the wall. "I am judging you. Or at least, I was. It's hard not to when I'm over here rationing my meal plan while you're paying for someone to fold your underwear." Camille laughed softly, a nervous sound that barely filled the space between them. "It does sound ridiculous when you put it like that." Lena smiled, faint but genuine. "You're not the only one who gets defensive. It's hard seeing someone have everything I don't, you know? I guess I don't know how to handle it." The admission hung in the air, raw and vulnerable. Camille nodded slowly, her chest tightening with an unfamiliar feeling. Empathy, maybe, or something close to it. I don't want this to be a competition. I don't want to feel like I have to apologize for my life. And I don't want to feel like I'm being pitted, Lena countered. Though her tone lacked the bite it once held. They fell into silence again. But this time it felt less like avoidance and more like a truce. It wasn't a perfect resolution. There were still years of biases and frustrations to untangle, but it was a start. As Camille helped Lena carry the last of the damp clothes to the drying rack, she found herself wondering whether they could actually become friends in the truest sense. For the first time, it seemed possible. Not easy, not guaranteed, but possible. And for now, that was enough. I've always thought of my sister Jess as my best friend. We grew up sharing everything. Clothes, secrets, even the little rituals we invented as kids, like sneaking cookies after mom went to bed. So when I moved back home for a few months after losing my job, I didn't think twice about sliding back into that old rhythm. But, apparently, Jess had other ideas. The incident started with her boots. Not just any boots, her perfect boots, as she called them. They were sleek, black leather with these intricate silver buckles, and she had been obsessed with them ever since she found them at some boutique sale. Every time she wore them, she strutted around like she was a model in a high-fashion ad. She'd even named them Apollo and Artemis. Yes, really. One rainy morning, I was running late for a meeting with a recruiter, and my shoes were absolutely soaked. As I rummaged through the closet, I spotted the boots. Sitting there, clean, dry, and undeniably fabulous. I hesitated for about half a second before pulling them on. It's not like Jess was planning to wear them. She wasn't even home. I figured, what's the harm? They're just boots. By the time I got back, Jess was waiting for me in the kitchen. She had this look on her face like she just found out someone drowned her puppy. I barely had a chance to kick off the boots before she launched into me. What the hell, Mia? Are you kidding me? Her voice was sharp enough to cut through steel. You wore my boots? My new boots? I shrugged, trying to play it cool. Yeah, so? They're boots, Jess. Chill out. I needed them for the rain. Chill out? Chill out. Her eyes widened, and she pointed at the boots like they'd personally insulted her. Do you have any idea how much those cost? And now they're all muddy. I told you, those are off limits. It was true she told me not to touch them, but honestly, who names their boots and expects people to take it seriously? Relax, I said, rolling my eyes. I'll clean them. No harm done. Jess stormed over, grabbed the boots from where I'd left them by the door, and held them up like a prosecutor presenting Exhibit A. No harm done? Look at these. They're scuffed. Do you even care about anyone else's stuff, or is it just yours that matters? I opened my mouth to argue, but she cut me off. You've been doing this ever since you got back, Mia. You leave your dishes in the sink. You borrow my makeup without asking, and now this? I'm so sick of you treating my things like they're communal property. Okay, so maybe I wasn't the most considerate house guest, but her rant made it sound like I was some freeloading gremlin, which was completely unfair. Are you serious right now? I snapped. It's a pair of boots, Jess, not the crown jewels. And if you're so uptight about your precious stuff, maybe don't leave it lying around. Her jaw dropped like I just slapped her. Lying around? They were in MY closet. In MY room. Well, maybe you shouldn't hoard all the good stuff then. I fired back. It was a stupid thing to say, but I was too angry to care. Jess always had this way of making me feel small, like I was the messy little sister who couldn't do anything right. It didn't help that she was thriving in her career while I was stuck couch surfing and begging recruiters for interviews. I felt like she was looking down on me, and it made me want to lash out. The argument escalated from there. She started listing every tiny thing I'd done to annoy her since I moved in, from accidentally shrinking her favorite sweater in the wash to eating the last slice of pizza without asking. I countered by bringing up all the times she'd borrowed my clothes growing up or left her hair all over the bathroom sink. By the time we were done, we weren't even talking about the boots anymore. It was like we'd opened Pandora's box of sibling grievances, and neither of us was willing to back down. At one point, Jess stormed into her room and came back with a plastic bag. Here, she said, shoving it at me. These are the things you left in the bathroom. Take them. And while you're at it, maybe find somewhere else to stay. I'm done." That hit me like a punch to the gut. "You're kicking me out? Over boots?" "I'm not kicking you out," she said through gritted teeth. "I'm setting boundaries. Something you clearly don't understand." I wanted to say something snarky, but the lump in my throat stopped me. I grabbed the bag and stormed off to my room, slamming the door behind me. I spent the rest of the day stewing, replaying the fight in my head and trying to convince myself that I wasn't in the wrong. It wasn't like I'd ruined the boots. Jess was just being dramatic. But the more I thought about it, the more I started to wonder. Had I crossed a line? Sure, Jess overreacted, but maybe she had a point about me not respecting her space. Then again, she didn't have to be so nasty about it. If she just asked me nicely, I would have apologized and cleaned the boots without all the theatrics. Now we're barely speaking. Every time we pass each other in the house, the tension is so thick you could cut it with a knife. She's still mad about the boots, and I'm still mad about the way she treated me. Neither of us is willing to apologize first, and honestly, I'm not sure I should. She made me feel like a terrible person over something so small. When we decided to move to Chicago, I thought it would be an adventure. A clean slate, new opportunities, a bigger city with a million things to explore. It wasn't until we actually started planning the move that I realized how much work it would take, and how different Alex and I were when it came to preparing for something so big. I've always been the planner. Give me a spreadsheet, a timeline, and a to-do list, and I can conquer the world. So, naturally, I made a Google Doc with color-coded sections. Apartments, job leads for Alex, moving companies, even a list of what we'd need for the winter because neither of us had ever experienced a Midwest January. Meanwhile, Alex would sit on the couch scrolling TikTok or texting friends. Every time I tried to show him the document, he'd give me a nonchalant, "Babe, we've got time. Let's not stress." Not stress? I was up to my eyeballs in stress. Every night, I stayed up late comparing moving quotes or reading neighborhood reviews. When I mentioned to Alex that we needed to figure out our budget, he waved me off, saying, "We'll adjust once we're there. You can't plan for everything, you know?" It drove me nuts. I needed numbers. I needed certainty. But I also needed him to care as much as I did, and his laid-back attitude felt like the opposite of caring. We had our first real fight about it a week later. I'd spent hours compiling a short list of apartments, complete with pros, cons, and screenshots, and I was excited to go over it with him. But when I brought it up, he barely glanced at the list. "These look fine," he said. "Let's just pick one when we get there." When we get there, I lost it. I told him he was being irresponsible, and that moving wasn't something you just winged. He shot back that I was making this way harder than it needed to be. "We're moving, not defusing a bomb," he said, throwing his hands up. "You're acting like the world will end if we don't follow some perfect plan." I hated how dismissive he sounded, but his words still stung. Was I overthinking this? Maybe, but it felt like he wasn't thinking about it enough. Over the next few days, we tried to meet in the middle. I'd bring up one task at a time instead of overwhelming him with the whole list, and he'd at least pretend to care about things like packing strategies. But the cracks in our approaches were impossible to hide. When I suggested booking a moving truck well in advance, Alex argued that it made more sense to wait until closer to our move date in case we changed our plans. "Flexibility is key," he said, as if he were teaching me some grand life lesson. I grumbled but let it go, even though I couldn't shake the thought that flexibility just sounded like code for procrastination. Then there was the night I found out he hadn't updated his resume yet. I almost screamed. He wanted to find a new job after the move, but when I asked what his plan was, he shrugged. "I'll start looking once we're settled. Something will come up." I couldn't believe it. What if nothing comes up? What if it takes months? He smiled at me like I was a child worried about monsters under the bed. "We'll figure it out. We always do." That was the thing. Alex had this unshakable confidence that everything would work out, like the universe owed him a favor. And to be fair, it usually did. He's the kind of person who walks into chaos and somehow comes out unscathed. I envied that about him, even if it made me want to tear my hair out. Still, I knew he was trying in his own way. One night, he suggested we have a packing party. He brought home pizza and beer, cranked up our favorite playlist, and we spent the night boxing up books and laughing about the ridiculous things we'd accumulated over the years. It wasn't efficient, but it was fun, and for a moment, I let myself believe that maybe his way wasn't so bad. But then came the day we almost didn't book the moving truck. I'd followed his lead and waited, trusting that we'd find one when we needed it. But when I called to reserve one, the guy on the phone told me they were almost fully booked. "You're lucky," he said. "We just had a cancellation." My heart raced as I confirmed the reservation. When I told Alex about it later, he shrugged and said, "See? It worked out." I wanted to throttle him. The closer we got to moving day, the more our differences seemed to collide. I wanted everything packed and labeled at least a week in advance. He thought it was fine to leave the essentials until the night before. I wanted to map out the drive and book hotels along the way. He thought we could just see where the road took us. "What if we can't find a hotel?" I asked, exasperated. He grinned. "Then we sleep in the car. Adds to the adventure." The thing is, I knew Alex wasn't wrong, at least, not entirely. His approach did have a kind of logic to it. Not everything can be planned for, and sometimes you do just have to roll with the punches. But knowing that didn't make it any easier to let go of my own need for control. Every time I tried to embrace his mindset, I felt like I was standing on a cliff, teetering on the edge of chaos. And yet, I couldn't deny that his calmness grounded me. When I was spiraling over whether we'd made the right choice, he'd pull me into a hug and say, "We're doing this together. That's all that matters." And I believed him. Mostly. We finally made it to Chicago in one piece, though not without a few bumps along the way. We ended up sleeping in the car one night after every hotel we tried was full. I was furious at the time, but Alex made it bearable by cracking jokes and turning it into a memory we'd laugh about later. On the other hand, he admitted he was grateful for my obsessive planning when we arrived to a fully furnished apartment and a stocked pantry, ready to tackle our new life. Now that we're here, I keep wondering if I was too hard on him, or if he was too dismissive of me. We made it work, but I can't shake the feeling that one of us compromised more than the other. So, AITA?